Ladies and gentlemen, the Stark Varg EX. Back in 2021, when the Stark Varg was first announced, it took the moto world by storm, as it seemed an electric bike was finally hitting the market that had real potential to disrupt the industry. There have been many companies over the years to try and enter the electric dirt bike world, but Stark seems to be the first one who put all of the pieces together and have proven they're here to stay. Love it or hate it, electric bikes are now part of the conversation. When I saw the announcement video, I remember thinking, man, would I love to try one of those. And then last year, my buddy Matt Spears bought one, which was my first opportunity to swing a leg over one. We ended up taking his Varg and my brand new KTM 300 up what we're calling America's hardest trail. And on that ride, Matt absolutely excelled on the Varg. Now, all of us on that ride know how good of a rider Matt is and that he'd probably make any bike look easy, but the Varg really was blowing our minds and seemed like it might actually be the best tool for the job. Fast forward a few months and I actually got an email from Stark. They had seen that video and asked if I would like to try the all-new Stark Varg EX, the off-road sibling to the MX model that Matt was riding in that video. I said, hell yes, thrilled for this opportunity. This spring, this Stark Varg EX arrived and I set it up, giddy with excitement to see what the hype is all about and how this bike really compares to my gas bikes. Well, I've since logged 25 hours on this machine, and that has been alongside logging hours on my 2025 KTM 300 XCW and my 2024 YZ450FX. After those 25 hours, I'm now here to give you my open and honest thoughts about my riding experience so far on this machine. I would like to disclaim that yes, Stark sent me this bike to test and use, but it is entirely up to me what I share and how I share it. I have no obligation here, and everything you hear will be open and honest from my actual experience with this bike. I would also like to note that should you decide you want a Varg and watching a video like this is helping you decide, if you purchase a Varg using my link before September 1st, you will earn a $300 parts credit over on the Stark website. That link is in the corner of your screen or down in the description below. And one last thing before we get started, I'm getting awfully close to the unreal milestone of 200,000 subscribers. I'm wondering if it might be possible to hit that before my 29th birthday at the end of the month. So if you do enjoy this video, please consider clicking that subscribe button and let's dive into it. Let's first begin with my initial impressions of this bike, its cost, and its value. Truthfully, I think the Varg is an absolutely beautiful bike. The bodywork is incredible, the presentation is great, and what it comes with is awesome. This bike comes with its own toolkit, which has everything you need to maintain this bike, along with torque wrenches, which is not something you're gonna get from anyone else. The pricing of these bikes over on the Stark website has seemed to vary a little bit. They've dropped a little bit. Right now, the EX ranges from about $11,000 to $12,000, depending on your options, and whether you want the 60 or 80 horsepower model, which I will talk more about shortly, and the MX version is a little bit cheaper than that. Now, I believe there is some potential for tariffs to impact those prices a little bit, but for now, that is what you're looking at for a brand new Stark Varg. Now, when you order a Varg from the Stark website, you are presented with quite a few options that are not offered from any other manufacturer, such as you can pick your suspension setup, soft, medium, or hard, and whether you want it set up for enduro off-road or motocross. There's also the option for the rear handbrake or rear foot brake. I believe the EX in the United States always ships with both because this bike is actually street legal, but in order to be considered street legal in the United States, it has to have a rear foot brake. They will even ship the bike with bib mousses installed for $190 for the set, which is cheaper than you can buy mousses online, and you don't have to install them. So what you're able to get delivered straight to your doorstep is significantly more personalized and ready for you to ride than any bike you're gonna roll off the showroom floor. Now, the price is pretty comparable to a brand new gas bike nowadays, and obviously the limitation for this is its battery life, which of course I'll talk more about, but for that reason, I still look at the Varg as an addition to rather than a replacement for a gas bike. Now let's talk about the riding experience. My impression when I swung a leg over the Varg for the first time was the same as everyone else I've let try it at this point.
That's insane, dude.
Isn't that wild?
Hell.
Hands down, the fastest dirt bike I've ever ridden, and it doesn't even have to be in a high horsepower mode to feel that way. I spend most of my time on this bike between 30 and 40 horsepower. The thing that sets this bike so far apart is not just the horsepower, but the instant torque. And not only that, but the chassis is comfortable. I honestly felt right at home on this bike immediately. The cockpit, the controls, the way the bike feels, it's all set up very nice, it's refined. It honestly took me just minutes to start feeling comfortable on this bike, which is a feeling that can take me hours on a gas bike. Funny enough, the next time I hopped on my 450, which I have about 45 hours on, it felt a little foreign to me. I was so impressed how well they did on the ergonomics and feel of this thing to put a rider right at home right away. And that conversation of comfortability is power aside. Now let's talk about the power for a minute. I just said I ride this thing mostly in 30 and 40 horse mode. It goes up to 80 if you buy the Alpha version. To be honest, I think 80 is pretty unnecessary. Even if you put this bike in 60 horsepower, it is absolutely going to blow your mind and will be faster than any dirt bike you've ridden by a long shot. This bike on hill climbs is one of the most insane things I've ever felt, because it's like you can do no wrong. You know, if you start to fall out of the meat of the power on your gas bike or miss a shift or screw something up, you might lose momentum on a hill. Whereas the Varg has unlimited power, or so it feels, and it's always there. Literally the only time I ever put this bike in 80 horse is to put a friend on it and say, yo, try this, it's crazy. If I put it in 60 up a hill climb, it is still completely baffling, and honestly, once you go much past 60, unless you're a phenomenal rider, it just gets harder to control. Because the power to the wheel at that point is so absurd that it's hard to manage the difference between spinning and traction. So if you're looking to get one of these and you want the fastest, baddest bike around, and you do want that feeling of, oh my gosh, you have to try this insane machine, go with the 80 horse. And if you want to save about $1,000, go with the 60 horse. I don't think there's any rider out there who would get this bike with 60 horse and think, man, I really wish I had a little more juice out of this thing. It is going to be so much faster than any 450 you've already ridden. So now switching gears, let's go back to talking about this rear brake. Now, when I got this Stark Varg, I actually started riding it with the foot brake, which felt very natural coming off of a gas bike. There was no lever at all on the left handlebar, which helped me get used to the feeling of not using a clutch. And once I was plenty comfortable, I swapped from the foot brake to the rear handbrake, and I've been very impressed with it. The rear handbrake really does make a lot of sense, as you no longer have a bad side when turning, whether that is on the motocross track or on mountainous switchbacks, and your feet can be perfectly placed at all times. And speaking of foot placement, I stay locked in on this bike thanks to these Alpine Star Tech 10s that I got over on MxLocker, who is the sponsor of today's video. MxLocker is a marketplace for power sports, by riders, for riders, with thousands of people just like you and I buying and selling gear on the app. I have personally used MxLocker to source quite a few different parts for bike builds. I've also sold lots of parts on MxLocker as parts begin to build up after bike builds, and I've acquired new gear like my Tech 10s. They have innovative programs such as the boot trade-in program, where you can send in your old boots for a discount on a set of new boots, and you can save $10 on your first purchase at MxLocker using the code KP10. Big thank you to MxLocker for supporting the channel. You can head over to the website linked on screen or down below, or download the app from the App Store. Now back to the Stark Varg. Back to the brake conversation, I've been very happy with the functionality of this rear handbrake, and it did not take me long to get used to. That said, braking power and braking responsiveness has been one of my very few complaints on the Stark Varg. Now the Stark comes equipped with Brembo brakes, which are widely regarded to be the best dirt bike brakes on the market. They're what comes on my KTM, and on my KTM, the feeling is firm immediately and incredibly responsive. Now, I noticed this pretty early on with the Stark. I noticed that the actual point of engagement is further into the stroke of the brake lever, and that is not a squishy feeling. It's that the lever actually just moves a half inch or so before that plunger in the master begins to engage. And then from there, they do feel a little bit softer than KTM Brembos. Now, I know you might be wondering, did you bleed them? Are they bled correctly? And I've bled many brakes over the years. This is something I started noticing pretty early on the bike and thought, maybe the fluid's dirty, maybe I need to bleed them. I did race this at Silver King's Hard Enduro, where I was very hard on the brakes, and after a bleed, there was no forward progress. Now, I'm told these are identical brakes to the KTM Brembos, so it is possible I'm doing something wrong. But I'm actually really curious to take them apart and see if there are any component differences that make these a little softer. Don't get me wrong, these brakes are good. It's not like I ride this bike and feel like I'm not going to be able to stop, but coming from a KTM Brembo and having that expectation of absolutely superior stopping power, these have left just a little bit to be desired. Now, surprisingly, I've actually found that this rear handbrake setup has helped me improve some of my bad habits on gas bikes. I've had a long-term bad habit of dragging rear brake when I don't need to, and having perfect foot positioning on this bike has in turn caused me to use the rear brake a little less on gas and only find it when I actually need it. Same goes for my bad habits with a clutch. I have a tendency to clutch in and out of most corners, even when not needed, even if I'm in the meat of the power on a gas bike, and having no clutch on this bike and getting used to that feeling of rolling through and staying on it has helped me use my clutch a little bit less. So that's something I didn't necessarily expect from this. I thought maybe it would make gas bikes become a little harder, or I'd get lazy and too comfortable with this, whereas I actually think my habits are improving when I get back on a gas bike. Also, sometimes when I ride this bike, I still feel like it's cheating or that it doesn't count as dirt biking based on things ingrained in my brain, that you have to shift and it has to burn gas to be considered part of this sport. And then I take a step back and think, what is my entire purpose for doing this sport? It's for enjoyment, fun, self-satisfaction, pushing yourself. And I can do all of those things on this Varg and have an absolute blast doing it. Not to mention, it's been a totally new experience. So I know there are still people out there who say, if it doesn't burn gas and shift gears, I am not interested. And to each their own, I respect your decision, but I've yet to meet someone who has ridden this bike and not had an absolute blast on it. So to each their own, but just a little bit of my 2 cents from my experience on this thing. So as I've ridden this bike for the past few months, I've tried to pay a great deal of attention to where it shines and where it might not, or where I'm better on a gas bike or better on the Varg. And to be honest, in any sort of fast-paced setting, I think I'm fastest on the Varg. I at least feel fastest. I've yet to do time trials, but I do plan to do a future video on that, so subscribe if you want to see me compare this to my Yamaha for actual lap times in a fast-paced cross-country setting. But that said, this bike's easy to wheelie, it's easy to pivot, it's easy to maneuver, the acceleration out of corners is unreal. It's been my favorite bike to ride for fast-paced riding, and the one that I tend to select when I leave my garage to go on a ride. It simply feels like it takes less thought and less effort to ride this bike smooth and fast. Now, this is gonna sound a little wild, but after riding this for a couple months, the next time I hopped on my 450, it felt a little unresponsive and like it lacks torque. And I know that is a crazy thing to say about a 450, as they are known to be torque monsters. But I've gotten so used to the instant throttle response and the ability to lift the front wheel of this bike without having to clutch or think about my gearing or anything like that. It's a simple twist of the throttle and my front wheel is up. And I found myself trying to do this on my 450, forgetting that even with a 450, for those immediate explosive wheel rises, you do have to be in the correct gear or shift the thing. In situations where I effortlessly lift the front wheel on this Varg, it takes substantially more effort and care on the 450, which I know sounds crazy as they are torque monsters. But when comparing the 450 directly to the Stark Varg, it's really not close. That is not to say I don't still love the 450, and not to say that torque is everything. The ability to lift the front wheel over an obstacle is not everything about riding a dirt bike, but it's something I notice with this, that instant torque is super noticeable on this and is something that you kind of miss on any other bike you ride. Now right now, like I said, I have 3 bikes, the 300, the 450, and this Varg. And since I've gotten my hands on this Varg, for most rides that I know I have the range for, I have chosen to ride this bike. And that's for a couple reasons. Truthfully, the fun factor is just incredible. I've been enjoying being on it more than my other bikes for the most part. And the lack of maintenance is incredibly appealing. It's pretty nice to load up your bike every time you go riding when my only task was to plug the thing in. No air filter to worry about, no gassing it up. There is a very small amount of gear oil in this thing that has to be changed pretty infrequently and only takes a couple minutes. With all this said, where might another bike excel past the Stark Varg? Or is this bike just the best at everything? I raced both this bike and my KTM 300 at Silver King's Hard Enduro. I raced this bike on day 1 and my 300 on day 2. Now, for the hill climbs and anything technical where I still maintain some momentum, I honestly think I was better on the Varg. Now that said, there were a couple sections on day 2 when I was on my 300, such as Milo's Creek, where I'd find myself stuck needing to bounce up and over an obstacle in one strong fluid motion. Now, if you ride a 300, you know to do that, you load up the flywheel, weight the seat, and kind of bounce as you drop the clutch to generate that momentum and traction to get up and over an obstacle. That is something specifically that I find difficult to do on this Varg. Without the use of a clutch and with just the characteristics of this electric motor, it can be very difficult to do something like that on this bike. You have to be perfect or you just spin the wheel. So for a lot of hard enduro riding, I like this bike at least as much as my 300, but there are very technical situations where the 300 does still shine over the Varg, in my opinion. But for every other type of riding, this bike is a serious competitor. And now for everyone's big question. Range. Short answer, 30 miles. Long answer, it varies a lot and depends how you ride it, what sort of terrain you're on, and what power settings you're on. Unsurprisingly, this thing does burn more juice if you're in higher horsepower modes. So, for example, day one at Silver Kings was a 17-mile course where I was riding race pace in a hard enduro setting. I was modulating the power on this thing between 25 and 53 horsepower, trying to conserve where I could. So for the flat or fast sections where I didn't need any more horsepower to go fast, I used about 25. On the big hill climbs, I was running about 40. On the really big hill climbs where I needed a fat pull up those things, I put this thing up to 53, which just felt like the right number, and it would absolutely pull up them, but it would drain the battery. So I finished that 17-mile race with only 5% battery left. Now, a couple other examples are I rode some really fast single track in Montana. I did a 22-mile loop and had 30% battery left. That was running 35 horsepower. My first ever ride on this bike was the pre-ride at Horse Creek Cross Country, which was an 18-mile loop in deep, sticky mud, which you guys know puts a lot of stress on a motor, and I had 20% left after an 18-mile loop of that running about 40 horse. So at a general, reasonably paced trail riding setting, you can expect about 30 miles out of this thing, but there are a lot of factors that can impact that. So if you are interested in one of these bikes, you need to ask yourself, does that make sense for where you ride and the type of riding you do? I've been pretty impressed with how often I'm able to take this for a ride. We'll go do evening rides that are 20 miles or less. I never have any issues with the battery life in those settings, and it's always a blast to take this thing up in the mountains, but it totally depends how you plan to use it. Now, I've only ridden this bike a time or two on a motocross track, and motocross definitely drains the battery quickly, but if you're at a track, you can charge these on a generator. If you have a generator with a 220 outlet, they charge pretty quickly. I don't know the exact time, but if you take a lunch break at the track, this thing's probably ready to go out and rip again. So that's something to consider if you're considering one as a motocross bike. Now, I think it's pretty fair to say that everyone would like the chance to try to ride one of these bikes, but is it worth buying one? I realize the barrier of entry is pretty high. These things are still so new that it's not like you're gonna hop on Marketplace and find one for $2,000 like you can a starter gas bike. They have been out for a while now, so I do see some deals popping up on Facebook Marketplace here and there, but ultimately, to buy a Varg, you're gonna spend a reasonable chunk of cash. So, is it worth it? Well, I don't actually own this bike from Stark. It belongs to them, and at the end of our agreement, I have the option to buy it from them. And as it stands right now, with how much fun I'm having on this bike, I really can't picture this garage not having a Varg in it and having this as an option to ride day in and day out. This bike is simply too much fun, and as much as I will always love to ride gas bikes, this has been an incredible addition to my fleet. It has enhanced my experience on two wheels and provided a new perspective. Those are my thoughts on the Stark Varg EX after 25 hours of ride time. I'm sure I forgot something, so if you have questions I didn't answer, leave them in the comment section below and I will do my best to get back to you. I would like to sincerely thank Stark for this opportunity. It has been an incredible experience. For someone who has such a passion for dirt biking, the fact that this new machine popped into my life and breathed even new life and excitement into this passion of mine is truly incredible. Hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed, and once again, if you are interested in purchasing one of these bikes, you will earn a $300 parts credit if you purchase one through my link before September 1st. Big thank you to Stark, big thank you to everyone watching. Almost to 200,000 subscribers. Click subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks, guys.